So next we'd like to move to Ken Martel. You know, at the April summit in Aspen, one of the presentations that got the most buzz was by a colleague of yours at USA Hockey, who just talked for 10 minutes about this thing called the American Development Model, which is, and I'll let you go on about it, but you pull it from, you've taken what Canada has done and looked at what other countries are doing and built a very specific model and then put policy behind it. Now, he didn't drill very deeply. He only had 10 minutes. He went right across the top. I found it to be interesting enough that I wrote an article in ESPN magazine, which you have a copy of on your desk, where I went to Michigan and went from community to community and tried to figure out how are they implementing this? Who's resisting it? Who's adopting it? And what are the results? And it really is a very promising solution. And so we've brought Ken in to, like I said, drill deeper on it. So, Ken, what do we? The American Development Model. What is it, and how scalable is it?
What is it? Well, basically, this all started as a youth sport organization. I mean, we are obviously a national governing body, and we have a connection to Olympic sport. But, you know, at our core, we are a youth sport organization, grassroots membership. You know, I mean, we really started by looking at ourselves internally and saying, like, really, how can we be better at what we do? You know, we certainly want players to matriculate through our system, become top performers in our sport, play for our Olympic team, but at the end of the day, it's the average kid playing youth hockey. You know, hockey's a cradle-to-grave sport. We have leagues where people are 70 years and older that play adult hockey. So how do we grow our sport? How do we get more kids involved? How do we keep kids? You know, with soccer, your example of having 400,000 players and not having enough talent or the talent in our country. And we don't look at it that way. We look at it as we have well over 100,000 kids playing ice hockey that are under the age of 8. Who knows who's talented in that group? We've had Heisman Trophy winners, Major League Baseball players, professionals in other sports, Olympic champions in other sports that played ice hockey. But we did something wrong and drove them away from the game. So we have the athletes. A Heisman Trophy winner, a pretty good athlete. Couldn't make a team when he was younger. Our structure didn't do him justice. So we took a step back and said, all right, well, how do we be better? You know, where are our issues? Where are our problems? And we started down the age-appropriate path simply because we've got a 16-year age-appropriate experiment going on with our national team development program. We centralize 2 under-18 teams at 16 and 17. We've been doing it for about 16 years. It's been very successful. A significant number of our Olympians on this next go-around here will be made up of players that have matriculated through that program. A significant number of the players on our last Olympic team had come through it. And we started off by treating a bunch of 16 and 17-year-olds as adults, and we learned some very harsh lessons because we weren't very successful at the beginning. And we changed and made adaptations to treat those kids more like kids, and lo and behold, more successful. So part of our goal was, all right, well, we've learned lessons there. We know what's right or what's better at those particular ages. How do we take some of that knowledge and just start applying it to younger kids? So the ADM for us is really a framework. We adopted the LTAD sort of principles and framework to operate with, because based on our own internal research, looking at our own sport, it fits us. It fits us very closely, and we thought it was something that we could use as a lens to evaluate our internal structure and really dictate and provide some guidance in how we address whether it's our coach education, whether it's our work with our administrators, whether it's the messaging to our parents. It's evaluating our sport in a much more age-appropriate fashion. And so it's looking at our rules. Unfortunately, in our structure, we've had a lot of rules and things that have crept in that they fit well for the adults that are running things, and they make life easier on the adults, but it may not suit the kids very well. So we had to take a step back and really start evaluating our sport. And where we were most broken, we felt, I mean, we're broken at a lot of levels, but where we were most broken was at our youngest age groups. 8 and under, 10 and under, 12 and under. Our youth sports system has kind of gotten out of whack, and so it was, let's start there, and we'll kind of move up the ladder as we go. But with that 8 and under age category, that's the starting point for us, because for the most part, we are an early participation sport, late specialization sport. Just with learning mode of transportation or locomotion to get around the rink, you have to be able to skate, and just having some exposure to that at a young age is good. We have some problems in our structure with entry points at a later time, other than adult hockey, but that's another subject. So we evaluated, tried to make changes with our basic structure, and the question really is this scalable? Is this applicable to other sports? And I look at what we're doing, and we've had our own little experiments going on in our office with our staff coaching other sports, and this is tailor-made for all kinds of sports. There's so much transfer here. Getting kids active, how you deal with them, how you coach them. There's no rocket science here, but it takes a bit of will, and just say you're going to go do it. And for our organization, I give our board a lot of credit, because they basically said, you know what, we believe in this. We're gonna make some hard decisions and make some unpopular decisions. They're the right decisions, but unpopular decisions. And they've done that and allowed us to move forward.
Well, it's one thing to come up with a plan or put a document in place, but then there's putting policies behind it that are going to be controversial. Talk to us about some of the policies that you've put behind it, and the resistance you've received, and maybe how you've worked through it, and what the ultimate, I mean, what's happened to participation, for instance?
Well, participation, again, we kind of look at that 8 and under age group. We've made some changes at different age groups, whether it's moving our body checking to an older age group, which, when you're changing aspects like that about a sport, there's going to be a lot of very unhappy, upset people in the youth community. So unpopular, but the right thing. For us, one of the lessons we learned, and we'll get to some of those other ones later on, but the competition structure always dictates development, always. And for us, we try, as a grassroots organization, we have a tough time mandating anything. So when we pick a rule to make a change to, it better be the right rule, and it better have secondary and tertiary, implications for us that are going to help. And the first thing for us was, at 8 and under, reduce the size of the playing surface to fit the kids. If youth sports are difficult, anytime a new kid comes in, a young kid, they don't have either the motor skills to do what you're asking, they don't have the cognitive skills, they don't have the perceptual skills. It's hard. But why are we making the sport even harder by having players, young kids, try and play on an adult-sized playing surface? So for us, changing the playing surface size to fit the kid for our competitions was the right thing, because it also dictates what coaches are going to do in practice. So in that smaller, say 3-on-3, 4-on-4 type of ice surface and environment that they're going to play in their competition, well, in practice now, they're not going to line up and practice face-offs and position and all these other things that kids don't want to do. It's no fun. So by putting the right game structure in place, the coaches are incentivized to do the right thing in practice. So the three major we've only made 3 major sort of rule changes with our sport along the lines for our ADM, and everything else has been a recommendation. And the 3 rule changes are: we eliminated 12 and under nationals because, 1, it's ridiculous. 2, you know, it has far-reaching implications on how teams are formed at the local level and what people, you know, whatever you set up as your structure, people are going to work really, really hard in the field to be successful at it. So eliminating 12 and under nationals, we're de-incentivizing coaches and associations to run around at 9 and 10 and to put together super teams, because they have to get ready to play at 12 and under nationals in 2 years. You know, so for our organization, it would be very hypocritical of us to run an event like that.
What's your sense of when they create these super teams at 8 and 9 and 10, where does it leave the kid who maybe is the late bloomer, or maybe is from the family who can't afford travel hockey? I mean,
they go on and become the Heisman Trophy winner at some other sport, right? You know, it's we drive our kids out. I mean, we want to be more inclusive, more participation based at those particular age groups. You know, and typically in our structure, you know, if you've got 100 9 and 10-year-olds in your youth association, you know, 15 of them make the A team, and you know, the next group, you know, get something. The other 85 get something less. You know, those kids that make the A team, they get the best coach. They get a little more ice time. They get a little more, and this is where relative age effect comes into play, because it's simply the kid that's 8 months, 10 months, maybe physically more mature, that makes the team, not the one that has more potential. And you know, so it's just this never-ending cycle. And you know, the relative age effect only has to bite you a few years in a row, and next thing you know, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy as to who has a chance to be good. Now, in our sport, that things can come back around because it all shakes out in the wash after puberty. In our sport, we are a contact collision sport. You know, I think there's some things to look at between the grams, centimeters, and seconds sports versus dynamic team sports, and well, even tennis is a very dynamic, you know, ever-changing environment. So some differences. I mean, if you're swimming, you don't have to worry about someone moving into your lane to give you an elbow to knock you off, right? I mean, so distractions and other things that are going on. Anyway, sidetrack. I want to come back around to the fun topic because, well, let's start off with some things that make this scalable. This document right here, I just got a copy of it this week, and I went through it, and I'm pleasantly surprised that we actually hit almost all. Well, we hit everything in here, not everything as well as we would like. I've circulated it to my staff, and they've already come back and said, you know what, here's something we're doing, but we can do better. But I'm pleased that we've included all 7 of these, and
design filters.
The design
and
filters.
Design to move. Right.
Exactly, and you know, but we do go back to the very last piece in here, led by well-trained coaches. We've changed our coach education structure. We've done a lot of things there, but that really is a key because they are the frontline deliverer of what it is we're doing. And in our world, you know, somebody said lacrosse, you know, parents don't know much. Well, you know, hockey is not a traditional sport in most places in the United States. So we have the same issue. And who are coaching our kids? Well, it's the parents. And so that is a huge, huge issue. We need better trained youth coaches that understand kids. And to be honest, they don't even need to understand our sport that much. If they understand how to treat kids, we're going to be much, much farther along. So let's get back to the play side and the fun. Our staff jokes all the time that we take our play very serious. And you know, Dr. Copeland talked about play and the word fun being different. It's different at every age group. We look at enjoyment. You know, what do we as adults take as enjoyment away? And it's from playing and participating. It's very different than what our kids do. So we've taken a big step in how we structure our practices and what we do with our kids in our training sessions to make them as fun as we possibly can. And what is that? Well, it's tough for us adults. It's been a long time since I was 6. So we've really had to spend a lot of time at looking at our sport and saying, well, what's fun for a 6-year-old? Well, that may be drawing little animal figures on the ice rink and having them go on safari. And to the parents, that doesn't look like ice hockey. So it's not always an easy sell, but finding things that are fun for them that they like to do, that are going to get them to move, get them involved, work on their skating when they don't know they're working on it. The way we structure our practices, it's a significant amount of time is in that sort of play environment. We may put a few rules or whatever parameters in, but there are a lot of games and things that they're doing that do not look like ice hockey. Mm-hmm. So those are hard things for adults that aren't familiar with what we're doing to grasp onto and say, oh yeah, that's a good thing. So.
You know, I was talking to Javier about this yesterday, and I'd like to bring him into the conversation in a minute here. You know, U.S. Soccer has produced some terrific documents about what's age appropriate. U.S. Youth Soccer is as well. I mean, I'm a U10 coach myself, and so I pulled up the U.S. Youth Soccer document and what needs to happen at that particular age. And what's interesting, I passed it around to my assistant coaches. They go, oh, look at this. U.S. Youth Soccer says we shouldn't be holding tryouts at this age. We shouldn't be separating kids into, you know, rec and competitive. And the irony is that the Connecticut Junior Soccer Association, which sanctions my team and my league, gets their sanction from U.S. Youth Soccer. So there are these documents out there, these recommendations, but they're often ignored, or people don't even know that they exist. So my question is, I mean, I'd like to hear both of you guys on this. From you, Ken, people in the grassroots of hockey know what USA Hockey wants. They may agree with it, they may disagree with it. No?
I think we've always, like a lot of sport bodies, we've always had good information, good materials, but you know, we have a difficult time from a national level connecting with the direct connection to the on ice level, you know, with our kids. There's a lot of disconnect. We are a grassroots volunteer organization, and I think as with a lot of organizations, sometimes your greatest strength is your greatest weakness. Yeah. And you know, we have some unbelievable volunteers that are fantastic. And then we have some that fall short of delivering messaging and some other things that are put into that place, you know, for them. But
I guess what I'm referencing is when I went to Michigan, I went to communities that have embraced ADM and communities that have resisted it. But everyone knew about it. Everyone knew about the cross ice, you know, mandate. They knew about they all had strong opinions about the body checking. So there is an awareness now. Now, how have you created, at least in the communities I went to, how have you created that? Is it a matter of just saying, okay, here's our policy, and if we're going to sanction you, then therefore you need to live up to it or be part of the conversation, or what's the key?
For us, I think a real key for us has been boots on the ground. Like the article that you wrote has Bob Mancini, who you worked with for the story, and you know, we were able to go out and hire some. You know, Bob's background, he was the former player development director for the Edmonton Oilers, coached our started our national team program, has coached major junior hockey, has coached Division I college hockey, high-level coach. We were able to go out and find a bunch of those type of people, but they also have kids that are involved, and they see what's broken at the youth level. So they have some cachet when they walk into the local rink and the parent says, well, you don't know what you're talking about, because they come from that level that people aspire that their kids to be. So we hired some people. They're in our country regionally, and for the first time, USA Hockey's had quality professional people that are communicating with our grassroots programs on a somewhat regular basis. So it's not this faceless organization. It is, oh my, this is USA Hockey, and wow, that guy was really intelligent, really professional, treated us fantastic, willing to help, and it's really, for our organization, probably reshaped in a lot of ways the opinion people have of our organization in general. So that's probably been the single greatest implementation, is because you got to actually go out and do something.
Right.
Producing papers, documents, whatever, they sit in a shelf. You have to make a commit that here it is, we're going to do something.
Yeah. Javier, your thoughts on why, I mean, how come even the guy who runs my association in town didn't know about these recommendations?
Right, because in soccer, I'm going to make reference again what happens outside of the US, because when you are in any European country or in South America, everybody follows what the federation is saying. And here, at some point, it looks like the Far West. Everybody can do whatever they want. You know, there are different organizations and ODP, AYSO, and so really the clubs and the people didn't know very well what to follow. But I think in the last, I'm going to say 6 years, US soccer has been taking the lead on what it should be done, what is appropriate and what is not. So I think it's just answering your question. I think it's just because it's very new, right? So we have this development academy league, which is very successful. We have 80 different countries, around 80 different clubs around the country, but it's only 6 years old. The curriculum right now, we published the curriculum about 3 years ago. So we are making big steps in a very short period of time. So this is why probably some people, they are not familiar still. And I wish we could have as well the resources that other countries have. But we are independent, and I think we maximize the resources we have as well. I wanted to make a couple of comments in relation to what Ken mentioned before. The point I was making about the 400,000 soccer players at high school, that's 16% in relation to 400,000 back in Spain. We are talking about a country which is, in terms of population, 9 times smaller than the US. So you can make the maths there, and I didn't talk about the talent. I talk about the athletes. So we know we are not going to get the better athletes, but we know that we can develop the skill of these players. And I think the other point is, I think it was very interesting what you mentioned in terms of the size of the field. And that's a critical point in terms of developing, I'm seeing there the panel, create early positive experiences, how we can create these positive experiences. So if we can play, and this is something we have as well in our curriculum, if we can make play younger players in smaller spaces with fewer players, they will have the opportunity to participate more and have a more positive experience. For instance, we have an study in soccer from Capranica in Italy, I think it's 2001, where they studied the difference between playing 11-a-side and 7-a-side soccer for 13, 14 years old players. And the conclusion was it was much better to play 7-a-side soccer because the players, they have more touches on the ball, it was more enjoyable, and the players had the ability to develop quicker. So just making that point.
Good.
Agreed.
Dan Gould, I did want to ask you, I'm not sure where you're going to go with this, but I did want to get your thought on ADM and whether it meets this, the psychological and social needs of kids.
Yes. First, I mean, just like the physical, it's harder to see, but kids are developmental, cognitively, and socially differ at different rates. Jay's written some interesting stuff about kids understanding systems, like systems of play. And it's hard to understand 10 people if you can't understand 3 in terms of who to pass to, or teaching kids soccer. I've often felt telling a kid to go to space, which a lot of things in soccer is like go where nobody is, versus stay 3 giant steps away from everybody else. You know, so how do we, you know, so it fits pretty well. I think we need to do more to better understand it as we go forward. One thing I wanted to follow up on, but the previous conversation, was this whole idea of communication. And I was talking to somebody last night. As an academic, I've become very interested in marketing knowledge. I think people in business get us to buy stuff sometimes we don't want because they make it something desirable. And so we have all this good knowledge here, but how are you going to get it, your question, to the league? And we know, for example, coaches' education now, it's typical to put things on a website, but most of the research shows coaches learn via experience and reflecting. So maybe you need to get them on the ice in the model. We also, a friend of mine became a dean, and a lot of dean's roles in colleges now is to raise money. And he went to dean school, a seminar, and they said you need 13 contacts before you can expect a donor to even think about giving money. So we send our one policy to the sport group once, and it dies on the desk. So how do we get that 13 times? That's what I took from it. And then the other, like, who delivers it? Like last night is really, you put an Olympic champion up there and they have the right message. You put an academic up and it may not be the best person, or you put a kid who says it. So I think we need to think about those things. And I guess the other, I was really impressed with your places, program, people. There might be some other P's, I'm not sure, but I said political and promotion. Just because it's the right thing doesn't mean people are going to do it. And there's a lot of, you know, like, it's great to say kids should have all the free play, but when you're an owner of a facility and you're legally liable for all those kids, you got to figure out a way to have some supervision where it's not controlling. Or the business of youth sports. I know with tennis, when they put their 10 and under in, they got a lot of traction once they showed the owners they could make more money by having more kids on a court. So there's a lot of political barriers that we need to think in the system. So I think that's what I took from that. So
Definitely. Brian Hainline, I mean, what do you think of the ADM model? Is it scalable? Can we bring it to other sports? And whatever else is on your mind.
Well, I think it's definitely can be brought to other sports, but I had a very practical question for Ken, because I think USA Hockey is being held up as a model right now. In fact, yesterday I was being interviewed for the American Football Coaches Association, and they asked about age-appropriate sport, and I said they should look at USA Hockey, and I threw tennis in there too, Kurt. But the question I have is legislation, and Jesse had mentioned earlier about, you know, the age eligibility rule, but it doesn't apply to the ITF. Well, we spent 2 years working furiously behind the scenes when I was with the USTA, and we couldn't get them to combine the rule, and it ultimately just fell through. And with a lot of the other sorts of, I mean, at the NCAA level, I mean, we can talk till we're blue in the face, but to get legislation and policy changes and to get 3 different divisions to approve of that, I mean, it's an enormously complicated task. And with tennis, it's the same thing. So maybe just talk us through, just practically speaking, how are you able to do this from a legislative point of view so efficiently and I'm not going to say it's easy, but seemingly you really accomplished something remarkable in a short period of time.
Simple, not easy. I think that's, in theory, you know, certainly not easy task. I mean, we as staff, we spend a lot of time, you know, discussing things with our board, and we do have very good leadership. Dave Ogren, our executive director, Ron DiGregorio, our president, they look at our sport, and you know, we're not out trying to change the sport, but safety has to come first. Anything that's related to safety and the health and well-being of our kids, and this would go into health and well-being, they've put center stage, and as an organization, they've just made a commitment to make that the priority, which is what it should be as a youth sport organization. So
How do you make them make that a priority, though? What's the sell?
there wasn't any sell to that level of our leadership. In all sincerity, I mean, Ron DiGregorio he's a passionate hockey person. Gets his role as the president of our organization, and he looks at this and says, "Yeah, we have to do it." And he's made the statement that, you know what, it may be some of this may be unpopular, and we may lose some membership, which in our world, that's registration dollars and revenue to the organization. And he's, you know what, we're going to do it. So we've had to convince the next layer of leadership, and that's an ongoing process. It's discussions, and I don't know if there's any secret other than just being persistent. You have to stay on it. You have to believe in what you're doing. It's like this in what we're doing out in the field as well. No matter what you come up with, no matter what this group comes up with, if we say black, there's going to be somebody out there that's going to say white. I mean, we can't ever underestimate the dollars and passion that are in the youth sport community. This isn't a cottage industry we're looking at changing. There are a lot of people out there that have their financial well-being and livelihood tied up into little kids. So this is a tough deal.
Well, let me jump in there real quickly, because one thing I noticed that you guys did do when you were selling the body checking, getting rid of body checking at the Pee Wee level, very controversial. You sold it on safety grounds, but you actually sold it almost more so on the idea that, hey, coaches, this will develop better athletes. So you created some alignment, some buy-in, because every dad out there wants their kid to be good. So, maybe I should adopt this. I mean, am I characterizing that appropriately?
Well, it actually started when we started down the pathway of looking at this a number of years ago. It was our staff saying, from a skill development side of things, kids really shouldn't be body checking at this age, because you ignore the puck, and there's a whole lot of skill reasons that we don't need to go into. But so we started at it from that angle, and we got a number of NHL people on our committee, and we did our due diligence in providing, getting the right teammates and spokespeople. Mm-hmm. But then we turn around and you tack in all the medical information, and now it's how can you say no? Mm-hmm. Well, there's lots of people that say no, but
right.
It really is persistence, just having that belief, and it makes our job as staff so much easier when, like, one of the things for change is know what your boss's expectations are. And that's important, because sometimes when you hire a bunch of high performance coaches and say, go ahead and get something done, we're very competitive people. And, my boss's boss knows that occasionally we may ruffle a few feathers, and, but.
So key here is getting literally the heads of the NGBs.
Your leadership has to be on board. You have to understand what the risk tolerance is of the stated risk, not just the stated risk tolerance of your organization, but the true risk tolerance of your leadership and the people that are at the grassroots level. So.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. We have a number of 10 cards up here. Kurt, do you have any thought?
When you try to build a model that puts kids first, and we're on the same path as USA Hockey, it's got to be safety and healthy and fun. As you start to go down, you realize that not all your stakeholders are going to put the best interest of kids first. And when you say, okay, we're going to come at them with science and theory and common sense, and that's going to carry the day, and it doesn't always work that way. Emotion will carry the day, and unfortunately money will carry the day. And when we say, it's not, kids under 10 should not be taking X number of tennis lessons a week, which is that deliberate practice, And right now, young kids are doing 80% deliberate practice in tennis sometimes. That doesn't go well with some segment of teaching pros that are making their living off of giving little Johnny or Susie 10 hours a week of private lessons. And just like I'm sure your hockey rink owners are not excited when you say, you know, 8 and under shouldn't play 60 hockey games a year. Well, if you're renting your rink, it doesn't all. So we have to really, somehow we need to make it clear that as NGBs, we're putting the kids first, to Andrea's point. And we got to try to shine a light on these stakeholders that if you really look, and they say, but you don't understand, we're not like other sports. This is tennis. No, it's not about tennis. It's about change and the fact that your business model doesn't work anymore. And we've got to get to the root of this.
Well, I think you guys did a great job. It's one of the things that we didn't do as well with, was you addressed your tennis club owners and your facility owners right out of the chute in a much better fashion than we did. And we're now having to circle back and do that, but showing them how they can be profitable and still do the right thing. And you can. I mean, we now have examples. You just look at retention in our sport right now. 3 years ago, the transition rate between 8-year-old hockey and 9-year-old hockey, that's sort of an age where if kids transition at that age, they're going to stick with the sport a lot longer. 56% of our population would transfer from 8 to 9 and stay with our sport. This past year, it's gone up every year. This past year, it's 63%. And we still don't have, you know, everybody out there on board doing what we're doing, and that number is going to go up. So our retention with our local associations and those early adopters, we've been able to show that programs that had 50 kids now have 180 kids. The growth, the retention is been through the roof with the programs that are on board. From our rink owners, we now have facilities owners that look at strictly from the business side of things. And I've had owners come to me and say, you know, development's nice and we want to, but the kids are happy, parents are happy, the concession stands, you know, 6 people deep every time I come in, the parking lot's full. This is the greatest thing for my business ever. So, but it takes some time, and you guys really did a great job out of the chute with that, and we missed the boat.
This is a great question. I mean, one of the Aspen timeouts we're going to throw later in the month at the SFIA, the Sporting Goods Manufacturing Group, is a panel on what is the business model for Sport for All, right? So many of these private facilities are essentially just trying to wring as much money as possible out of the kids who can afford travel and private kind of coaching. But is there a business model out there that supports broad-based activity? Maybe you can make as much money or more, but it's less per kid. By the way, if any of you have any ideas, if you've seen local, examples of that, anecdotes, please let me know, because I think, as we continue this conversation, we do need to think about how to make this work for the entrepreneurs out there as well. How do you incentivize them? So I'm open for ideas. Okay, let's see here. Let's go to Tom Avicius.
You had asked the thing, can other NGBs do this or can other sports do it? And one of the things that's been kind of ironic that Ken and I think laugh about a little bit is really was only about a year and a half ago that we got together and kind of started talking and found out we're based in the same town. We're both in Colorado Springs. We never talked to each other. And what we found is that we had a lot of the exact same issues and things, and some of the things that we're kind of dealing with in swimming are things that they have come up with. We had a document that we called the Progressions for Athlete Developments, and Tom, you kind of mentioned the thing with your own sports background that people don't know that these documents exist, so we're in the process of redoing it, and we're going to call it the American Development Model for Swimming. And the whole idea and concept that if we can get other sports to kind of adopt that, it seems to me to be a great selling point. American Development Model, swimming, tennis, And I think one of the other things, not some of what Chris is going to talk about, is I think in the last 2 years, we've done a much better job in the NGBs in talking to each other and finding out and kind of trying to pool some of our resources.
Yeah, we'll hear from Chris in the next session, which we're going to move to in just a minute. But let's see, Kristen, did you have a thought?
Yeah, I just a little bit on sort of this broader concept and the idea of culture change, and tying into a little bit what Dan said about the 13 visits, and understanding that this is a the 7 to 10 year process at least minimum that we're committing to, and that the message we want to give them isn't necessarily the message that they can hear or that they're ready to hear. And so we may have to, I love the one example I think Bob gave at the last program we were together with hockey, where one of the groups was not ready to play cross ice. And so it was, well, let's play a little cross ice, then let's go back to big ice. So we're just going to experiment with it a little bit, and then we'll go to big ice. And by that time, the parents were clamoring because they saw sort of the craziness of letting the kids play the big ice. So being creative with how we're messaging it so that the parents can hear it, because there's a very strong emotional investment in sport, as you mentioned. And that leads to sort of this inherent and perhaps misplaced trust in sport when it should be in the people who are running the sport. I always tell my young coaching educator students that basketball is not going to develop your child. It's the person who's handling the basketball and trying to get them to really understand that. So I think we've got to look at how we're marketing these messages a little bit better to what they can hear, what they're ready for. And yeah, we'd like them to eat the vegetables because they're good for them, but the broccoli looks like little trees, and that's fun. And that's, for the parents as well, not just the kids.
Yeah, David Epstein.
If I press hard enough, if this will work. Yeah. Just 3 real quick things that Ken mentioned and Javier mentioned: reducing playing size, field size, and court size, and that brought up a couple things I heard over and over, sort of in the reporting my book. One was, anytime I went to the hospital for special surgery, they all told me that we reduced the ball size in football and basketball, but not in baseball, and that puts like weird torque on the kids' arms because their hands are too small. So I'm not sure why we don't do that in baseball. I became acquainted with a Brazilian game, and maybe Javier can help me pronounce this correctly, called futsal, I think, which is basically like, what table tennis is to tennis. It's like soccer on a mini field, and it seems like it's played widely in Brazil. The kids get tons of touches, or whoever, adults play too, they get tons of touches. And for me, I played a little bit of soccer when I was a little kid and then didn't stay with it, I guess, as many Americans do. And even though it looks like it's probably technically more difficult, it seems really inviting because you can just sort of get a quick touch and get back in the game. And it made me wonder if sort of making reduced playing size spaces would be like more inviting for kids and maybe for adults too. And I heard the same thing in basketball, where there was a really popular New York article about this team in California that had no skilled players but won by full court pressing all the time, because you can sort of confound kids at that age because their skills aren't good enough. And the coaches I would talk to said that that's like disastrous for skill development, that you can win at young age groups by pressing all the time, but that eventually players are going to get better. It's not going to work, and you don't develop dribbling and shooting and passing skills by winning by the press. So they advocated maybe even moving to either banning the press or smaller court or just half-court play. So anyway, those were just things that came up as I was reporting my book.
I have a quick question for you, Ken. I mean, USA Hockey's motivation here was to reduce the attrition rate, right? You got these kids signed up. You wanted to keep them moving through. But let me ask you this. Is there any sense that it will... It opens up the sport to more kids? Is there, could it make hockey more affordable to more kids? I mean, because one of the best facts I came across in the course of my reporting about what USA Hockey is doing in Michigan is that in the city of Detroit, right, 700,000 people, and you guys keep numbers on all this stuff. There's so few kids in the city proper playing that you've eliminated that entire district. And it's something like 150 kids, and 80 of them are through an inner city program that's underwritten by the NHL. Yep. So the NHL, Hockey Town, Detroit calls itself Hockey Town, and there are 80 or so kids who are playing hockey on their own. In part, I heard, because the thing is so darn expensive. Yeah. So is ADM, this type of age-appropriate model, will it open up the door for more kids coming in?
It'll certainly open up the door for more kids. We will have, well, we'll get to that, but we will have some issues because as a facilities-based sport, the electric bill for the ice rink is something we're probably never going to get around. So we can make it cheaper, but it's never going to get free unless Nike wants to subsidize some rinks. I don't know, but so what we've done traditionally with a hockey team, there's 15 kids on average, and 15 kids on a full ice sheet at 8 doesn't make a whole lot of sense because they can't use the whole sheet. So what's that cost per kid on an hour of ice time with only 15 out there? And with us, we put, at 8 and under, we'll put 50 kids on the rink. So now all of a sudden, that shared cost, the resource utilization goes way down. The kids still get everything that they, need out of it. And kind of the way I explain it to people is I use a swimming analogy, and I say, well, if Michael Phelps has his lane to train in, doesn't matter if the kid over here has got his water wings on. It's okay. You can put lots of different ability, lots of kids, so that reduces the cost. We've also, a lot of the equipment manufacturers, kudos to them, but they got on board with us in Hockey Canada and created a program called One Goal. And we have put out about 40,000 sets of starter free gear into our local communities in the last few years. So we've eliminated that barrier of, a kid wants to try ice hockey, show up. Like the Pittsburgh Penguins have done a great job for us in their market. They've paired up with Dick's Sports, and any kid in the city can go to Dick's Sports, sign up with the Penguins deal, and get free gear to start trying ice hockey. Any kid, until all the equipment's gone, and they have several thousand sets a year. So these are eliminating costs and barriers to entry, and we have local associations now that can charge based on the numbers of what they put out there. We're cheaper in some communities than what the local soccer program is charging, and and we have an ice bill. So it's pretty good, Or we can get it to a certain point. It's not going to go completely away because of the electric bill.
Do you need help from government? Tom and Jess, you come from Minnesota, where the participation numbers are pretty good. Every community has a hockey rink there, and that's in part because the state or the local communities through state law. I reported on it once. I can't remember exactly what it was. Subsidize it in some form or another. Sweden, you and I talked about a town called Skellefteå, where it's a little town of like 40,000 people. Well, you tell me real quickly about what you've learned. The costs there are much lower. And
costs are lower, but they have a top team in their professional league, which is probably the third best professional league in the world. Last year, they just won their professional league championship, and of the 27 players on contract, 14 of them are from that town, homegrown, born and raised, and that's not counting the other ones that are here in the National Hockey League playing professionally. They're a club, youth sport club. The ice is in 6 months a year. They don't play year-round. Their 7-year-olds are on the ice twice a week, 10 and under 3 times a week, 12 and under 4 times a week. Our kids get as much ice time or more than they do. They multi-sport, late specialization approach. They're just very patient. They're parent coached. The club is open to anybody. No cuts. They're not cutting kids. If you want to come play and they can't go and recruit from the next town over because it's darn near the Arctic Circle, and so there's nobody next community right next door.
By no cuts, you mean no cuts through like age
14,
age through 14.
Yeah, if you want to be and they don't cut kids at 14. But what happens is, if you're really good, the professional club then takes over sort of your development and contributes and takes over the full cost. But it still costs their kids. They're very similar. It's a Western culture. They have the same distractions that we do. The biggest difference is they are just patient with their kids. They're not trying to win the 10 and under Swedish net. Well, they don't have those. They don't have a national championship till 16. So, but
Yeah, it's a really interesting model. I mean, there are
works.
sport for all, play for life communities out there. You just might have to go to Sweden to find them. Right? Yeah, Tom. What have you seen with Minnesota?
Well, to your question, first of all, we can skate outside. Like Jesse has a rink 3 steps out our back door, so that's free ice in the winter, just as long because it's cold. So there's a lot of access in places like Canada and Minnesota and some places which you're not going to get in Detroit as easily. So just the fact of natural coldness. I wanted to just fill in. I never met Ken before this meeting, but you kind of got him working on the policy, and then I'm at the other end. And you were asking Ken, how you get the message out, and Javi, you were talking about you got this website with all this great coaching material, which and same with you, Tom. You guys have, as a complaint and a compliment, I can't step on a rink with kids until I do these modules, which take a long time. And you can't cheat because you can't just say, I watched it. You can't fast forward because they want to know what the name of the guy who was, was it Joe that was talking? I mean, they're not even hockey questions at the end of the module. They say, was it Dan or Joe who was, on the rink? And if you didn't watch it, you can't. So the message, they're able to get the message to us. And you were in Michigan, you saw it. Everybody knew what was going on. Because we honestly absolutely cannot step on a rink with 9 and 10-year-olds unless we watch, 10 hours of these videos in which there's no way to cheat. So they're using technology very well, getting their message out, and they're good too. You start out, you don't want to watch them, and by the end you're thinking, geez, I may not be a very good coach because they make it very clear, you're developing passion. You're not, so whatever solution you're in, I would just really encourage you to maybe have a look at how USA Hockey is getting the message out because they're doing it effectively.
Okay, very quickly, final comment to Colin, and then we're going to move into the next session. And rather than take breaks here, so we can take, just if you want something to eat, drink, whatever, just go in and grab it. Come back to your seat at your leisure.
Just piggyback on what Tom said, as an operator of an Olympic venue that has 2 ice sheets for hockey, what USA Hockey in my mind has done is put money and resources towards creating well thought through coaching materials and deliverables to the grassroots facilities. And not every NGB or sport organization can do that, but they have consciously set aside monies to do that, make it very accessible, and have very well thought through, right down to detailed practice plans for mite level hockey. And that is very useful for administrators of facilities to be able to have the coaches employ a well thought out philosophy that really resonates for parents and the participants in the program.